Good morning. Welcome to Wednesday Bible study, Wednesday reading through the Bible, reading it for all it's worth, listening for the plain truth of the Bible in a plain reading, and trying to use the strength of scholarship and research and scientific methods in translation to avoid putting our ideas into the text, thereby not hearing anything of the inspiration of the text from the divine. I'm Pastor Lou Kilgore, and if you've just joined us, the other series are available. If you look back on the YouTube page, I'm trying to get in there and have time to get in there to name them. But truthfully, there's a lot of times when they're not named, and so you don't know what's going on. Anyway, just have to make sure everything's okay. All right. So, by way of sort of honesty, the psalm for today is Psalm 15. It's only 5 verses, so our study today is going to be very short, I think, and that's okay. I'm trying to get my feet back on the ground from big disruption in the sequence of my life. I do live a kind of structured life, and with an illness and a surgery, that was interrupted, and then the death of my dad and all the things that accompanied the rituals of grief and all that. I am upside down, inside out, and just as a confession, I'm not feeling very well today. So, what else can I say to you? So today we're going to read Psalm 15, and Psalm 15 is it's a very interesting psalm. It's very small, but it gets at one of the questions that sort of bounces around in life all the time, and that is, am I worthy of God? Am I worthy of God's love? Have I done what God wants me to do? Do I live my life in the way God wants me to? And if I haven't, what do I do? And it asks the question, who is worthy of entering into the presence of God? Now, in the Hebrew daily life, there was always a place, a temple, a tent, a place where you could go, and you would be asked maybe questions as you came in, if you had prepared yourself to come to a place where you would enter into and enjoy a sense of the presence of God, of nurturing a relationship with God. And there was instruction that says you cannot just take this casually. You cannot just pop in here. You need to do a little inventory, and not to make you feel bad, but to help you to better prepare yourself. The title of this is Preparation for Worship. What are the requirements for me to come into the presence of God and to be able to benefit from knowing that my relationship to the divine is clear, that it's working, that it's working. So, with that in mind, then let me read Psalm 15, verses 1 to 5. O Lord, who may reside in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. He has not tripped over his tongue, and he has not done evil to his friend. He has not taken up reproach against his neighbor. In his eyes, the reprobate is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord or stand in awe of the Lord. He has sworn to do no wrong and does not falter. He has not lent his money on interest, nor taken a bribe against the innocent. The one doing these things shall not be shaken forever. All right, so I just, you read that list and you go, okay, that counts me out, right? If you break the list down the way it really arrives, there are 10 things here that are listed, 10 positive things and 10 negative things, 10 things that you should do and 10 things that you should avoid doing. if you want to be able to walk in an unobstructed relationship with God. This psalm was used as an entrance liturgy. It was meaning this is something that people would say. They would recite this, like the 23rd Psalm. They would recite it as a way of sort of bringing them back to the basics to say, okay, what do we know about God? What do we know about relationships? And what do we know about what works and what does not work? And what makes God happy and what hurts the heart of God? It's called an entrance liturgy. It was also used as a repetitive phrase to instruct children, young people, concerning the moral implications of participating in worship. And I'd say not just worship, but in participating in a relationship with God. The concluding line is not a blessing, but a promise concerning the outcome of a life based on morality and worship. You're familiar with the 10 Commandments. If you look carefully and you line them up, there are 10 commandments here. There are, 5 positive conditions and there are 5 negative conditions. Number 1, walk blamelessly. These are the positive ones. Do right, speak the truth, despise reprobates, which means don't hang around with bad people. You got to keep your company clear, and then swear to do good, promise to do good. The negative conditions are stop bearing falsity. Don't engage in saying false things. Don't do evil deeds towards other people, and no reproach. I don't know what I wrote down for that one. I guess it's that part of do not falter. And then no usury and no bribery. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that and why that's so important in terms of this foundational principle of what does the Lord require of you. Anyone who desires to enter into the presence of God needs to meditate on the nature and the question of who is it that can enter the presence of God. If a person is to enter the special place in which God is present, it's the question must be, what must that person be like? It's vital, for the answer given to it will affect the questioner in preparation for worship, and it will affect how then you live your life, keeping in front of you the goal, the mission statement of a life lived with God. The question, if genuinely asked, will elicit an answer which invites examination of the self and hence appropriate preparation for admission to worship to the divine presence. Now, in the Presbyterian Church, we accomplish some of this, but we put in at the beginning of our gathering, you're already in the building, but we still talk about being able to enter into a place where the sermon will edify and the hymns will have their most power, and where the relationships with other people will be the most helpful. And that the pathway in there is this moment of truth. It is an inventory that you take. It's not to make you feel bad. I had one woman that left the church I was serving because she said when we do the prayer of confession, she feels like every time we go to the prayer of confession, we're just beating her down. And she doesn't want to focus on the negatives of her life. She wants to only think about the positives. And I say, well, okay, but the discipline of a long history of our faith is not that we do this inventory and this truth-telling about ourselves, or more importantly, about what is our goal. Keeping our goal in front of us. When you put your goal in front of you, yes, you're going to see whether you measure up or not. But the purpose of that is not to drive you away from pursuing the goal. It is to say, okay, you could do better. You can do better. And commit to doing better. Because when you do, you will arrive more at what you want. The answer provided in a series of 10 positive and negative conditions. The positive and negative are both important, for the person who would enter God's presence must have a life characterized not only by active goodness, but also by the intention to have evil absent from your life. So, The sixth condition, positive and negative toward fellow human beings, but more than that, it refers to companionship. The one who despises the reprobate. This is something I wanted to talk about. The company and influence of evil persons. If you look a little bit at the success of the 12-step movement, it's not that they're trying to pass extra judgment on drunks and drug addicts, but when a person comes into the 12-step group and they're in the room, one of the things they're told is you're going to have to change people, places, and things. You're going to have to start to hang around with people who value sobriety. You cannot continue to associate in the people or the places or the things. You cannot just say, well, you know, I've got sobriety now, and I'm going to live my life alcohol-free or drug-free, but I'm still going to go hang out with all my friends in the bar. It's just not going to work. It's not an effort to put further judgment on those people. It's just to say, look, these are the hard facts of life. If you're going to make these strides towards a better life, a life of happiness, a life of wholeness, a life of sobriety, you've got to look at the power that comes into your life from people who say, oh, well, whatever, I don't care what happens. They're living their lives out of control. If you're going to continue to associate or hang out with those people, you will eventually then say it doesn't matter either. The last two conditions are in some ways the most specific of the 10. A person who would enter God's presence must have avoided both usury and bribery. Now this was, I thought, worth talking about. In the economy of the Hebrews, because they were to be a blessing to the families of the earth, we always come back to this. What is the mission? What is the mission that's in between, underlying all the pages of the Bible, is that considering the brokenness of the world, the heartache of broken relationships with God and with each others, and disease and illness, all the things that we call sin, here's what could be, and then here's what is. In consideration of all of that, God is actively engaging in blessing the world. And the most concrete way in which God is participating and blessing in the world is that God is engaging individuals like you and me and others to make this stride towards avoiding evil, avoiding the terrible things of life. It's not that we're perfect at it. It's that, you know, we do it. If you fail, you apologize, you get up, and you go back to the goal. And the purpose of that is to have people who are receiving God's blessing, and then they become not just sterile people who aren't doing bad things, but they become people who are actually participating in active good things in the world. It's not that they're good people. We got to stop with that idea. It's that we, in the same way that we can avoid and stay away from people who are continuing self-destructive patterns, we can ourselves begin to lay down a foundation of self-preservation and of preservation of wholeness and relationship with God. And one of the most fundamental ways in which the law, if you will, these 10 conditions are like the 10 commandments all over again. And it names right in here that one of the most damaging and hurtful things that we can do is we get caught up in the fact that if you have some extra money, you're sitting on $5,000 or $10,000 in the bank, or even $100 in the bank, and one of your family members or a fellow Hebrew comes along and asks you to give him a loan. Now, the text is implying that if a fellow Hebrew is asking for a loan, they're asking because they have entered into hard times. They've entered into hard times. And the encouragement, given the fact that you have this awareness that all that you've received from the hand of God, you would be willing to loan your neighbor, your friend, sometimes even a stranger, loan them this money. But that you had to guard yourself from a tricky kind of generosity, which says, yeah, I'll loan you the money. Let's shake hands on it. You're going to pay me back first for the first 3 years. You're going to pay me just interest at 10 or 12% interest, and then you're going to owe me the whole loan, and I'm going to secure the loan by, if you don't pay it, I own your house. This is This is the trap. This is the trap of looking like we're acting for the benefit of others when the truth is we're all sold out to some other system of how we get ahead in life and how we treat one another. The rules of Hebrew life forbid usury. Now, it didn't forbid interest across the board. It didn't say that you were not allowed to charge interest. What it said was that you were not allowed to charge exorbitant interest that would culminate in the aggravation of distress rather than removing it. So if a loan were to be made at all to a fellow Hebrew, it could only be secured by a pledge of their word, without interest. And then the other, you think about our society today is based on interest. It is based on interest. People get into trouble. Who's paying the highest interest rates on credit cards? The people who can least afford it. Who gets the lowest interest rate on credit cards? People who have all the money they need. So that the help becomes a millstone around their neck and drags them down. This is the kind of debauchery, this is the kind of double-mindedness that the ancients and still today people say, you're not kidding anybody. You're not helping people. You see the ads all the time. You're having trouble paying off your loans. Come to us. We'll put all your loans together and we'll charge you one fat interest rate or one lower interest rate, but they've got you now on a hook. I guess what I want to say is that the difference between wisdom and spiritual maturity or living a life of faith, there's a fine line here. And it's a difference that makes all the difference in the world. From human experience, the psalmists were constantly shaken by the experience of human oppression and the vicissitudes, there you go, there's a big word, of life. And so they issued their laments. But the only possibility of transforming lament into confidence or praise lay in the fact that there was an unshaken position transcending the vicissitudes of a shaken and uncertain life. That position was in the presence of God, whether in public worship or in private devotion. So this morning on NPR, I was thinking of the vicissitudes and the experience of human oppression. There's a great crisis happening on the southern border of Texas with Mexico right now. And it's out of control. The political solution doesn't seem to be in the hands of anybody. And 1 million refugees have crossed the border looking for a better life or some shelter or protection from the kinds of people that the psalmist understands are out there in the world. There are bad people out there in the world, ready to take advantage of people, put them into human slavery, destroy any person that could defend them and then make them their own. So these young people, a lot of teenagers, are fleeing across the border to where they hope they will find a nation based on these kinds of concerns. I mean, whether or not we've ever accomplished it, we've at least thrown it out there, that we are a nation that will provide shelter from human oppression, and that we understand the vicissitudes, the brokenness of life, and that when you meet someone from our community, because God has loved us and cared for us, we will try to figure it out. That doesn't mean that we just go, oh, fine, whatever, come on in. It won't, because that will also then sink the ship for us. But this morning on NPR, there was a live report coming out of some of the border towns and in these shelter communities where these teenagers are being sort of warehoused. I mean, I think there's an effort to try to make it a little bit better than it was. But these teenagers are being subjected to abuse. They're being subjected to sexual abuse by the border agencies, by some of the border agents. It's not something that characterizes all these people. Certainly not. But, there was a case of a 13-year-old girl who was raped, and then there's a boy who is coming, he's in the shelter for safety and protection. He doesn't get safety and protection. He gets abuse. And the food is horrible. The food is making the children sick. And I'm not saying, oh, what terrible people there are in charge. I'm just saying we have to name these horrible conditions, and we have to say that these things should give us permission to lament, give us permission to say this should not be. What can I do? What do we do? That's all part of the life of faith, of owning this standard for what it means to be a person in the presence of God. I often say that Christianity never was intended to be see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil kind of drug that helps us to get through our day and pretend that everything is fine. In fact, this entrance into worship, which can sound like it rules us out or disqualifies us, is actually a commitment to the standard of what God has called us to, and by listing it, we claim that it's part of our standard in the world. Psalm 15 provides a guide to entrance, to access into the presence of God. It reflects on the wisdom prior to entering the divine presence in worship, on the wisdom of reflecting upon the requirements presupposed of the worshiper. I'm going to read this last paragraph from my scholar commentator. What transformed the psalm from a barrier to a gateway is the realization that the preparation for worship illuminates the necessity for worship. On the one hand, we must live in such a way that we may prepare for worship with integrity, without hypocrisy, taking that inventory, reminding ourselves of the standard and holding ourselves to that standard, not for the purpose of disqualifying ourselves. That's when it becomes a barrier. It's not a barrier, it's a gateway. Living without hypocrisy, with integrity. On the other hand, introspection involved prior to worship, the need to take the inventory, clarifies beyond any doubt the need for forgiveness. This is where we come back to the pattern of Presbyterian worship. Failing to have fulfilled the 10 conditions, we, all of us, require forgiveness before we can enter the divine presence. Only then do we realize that the privilege may never be casually exploited, and also that the holy God is not inaccessible. God is accessible. And in that access, as we enter into the place of worship or the reminder of who God is, we are drawn out of the brokenness of the world. We are called out from it. We're not pushed down and pushed out. We're invited further in, claiming the forgiveness of God and being confident. I'm going to read the psalm again. O Lord, who may reside in your tent, who may dwell on your holy mountain, the one who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. He has not tripped over his tongue. He hasn't lied. And he has not done evil to his friend. He has not taken up a reproach against his neighbor. In his eyes, the reprobate is despised, people, places, and things. But he honors those who fear the Lord. He hangs out with people who share these goals. He's sworn to do no wrong. He's sworn to do no wrong and does not falter, but might indeed falter, and this is where it comes out. He's not lent his money on interest, nor taken a bribe against the innocent. The one doing these things shall not be shaken forever. Okay, my friends, it's a short psalm, and I hope you don't feel cheated today, but for me, it's an installment of getting my feet on the ground, jumping in the water. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of edification on this Wednesday morning, and I'll be back, and we'll do the next psalm next week. God bless you all, and I hope that your journey with God is one that releases you into the sense of the holiness of God and of the goodness of life. God bless you.